What's up guys, I'm Nico of CamCrunch and today's video is going to be about shooting in manual mode. But before we start, I want to ask you guys a question and be sure to leave your answers in the comment box down below. And that question is, do you think that when you're using an advanced camera like a DSLR, maybe a mirrorless camera, do you think that you should always be using full manual mode? Leave your answers in the comment box down below and I'll be sure to get back to as many as I can. So today's video is about shooting in full manual mode and whether or not I think you should be shooting full manual mode all the time. As beginners, sometimes you think that when you're shooting with a DSLR, full manual mode is the way to go. It's what the professionals use. It's like, you know, it's the highest level of control that you have. And that's partially true. It is the highest level of control that you can have over your camera. It is what a lot of professionals use, but I don't necessarily think that you should use it all the time, especially if you don't feel too comfortable using full manual mode right off the bat. There are things that I use full manual mode in because, again, it gives you that full control. For example, long exposures, I don't use time value or shutter priority mode for that. I use full manual. When I'm using strobes, flashes, studio work, I use full manual mode. And when I'm shooting with my film cameras, for sure I'm shooting in full manual mode so that I get the exposures correct. But for around 80 to 90% of my shots, because I like shooting more candidly, you know, I just like shooting my friends, family, that sort of stuff, my camera's set to aperture priority probably 80 to 90% of the time. I like aperture priority because, for one, it's semi-automatic, which means when you point it at something, your camera guesses an exposure or tries to determine exposure through the metering, and that will sort of give you a baseline. So when you take out your camera, there's already sort of a set point where your camera can take a photo and it's going to be a decent shot. And then you have exposure compensation, which lets you over and underexpose your shot based on the meter reading that gives, and that gives you a little bit more control over your shot. So for that candid style that I like taking, aperture priority is really a good way to have your camera set at all times, even when you're moving around different lighting conditions. It always has sort of a baseline depending on what meter mode you're using. Now, while I shoot with aperture priority most of the time, I still think that you should try to learn how to use full manual mode, because learning to use full manual mode gives you full understanding of your camera and the way it works. And then when you do transition to using aperture priority most of the time, like I do, or, you know, if you want to use some other mode, shutter priority or something else like that, then you sort of know how to control your camera because you have an understanding of aperture, shutter speed, ISO, and all that stuff. So if you're intimidated by full manual mode, don't think that it's a must. In fact, a lot of professionals don't use full manual mode, believe it or not. I believe it was Scott Kelby who said this once in an episode of The Grid, which is another podcast. He was talking to another photographer and he talked about how he likes shooting in aperture priority as well, and then he rides the exposure compensation. I believe Zach Arias also talks about using aperture priority mode with his Fuji cameras, and he also rides the exposure compensation for those candid moments just like I do. So again, I guess the point of this video is definitely learn how to use full manual mode, but don't feel required to use it or be pressured to use it all the time, because the truth is, because of how advanced our cameras are, you don't need to use full manual all the time. So again, leave your comments and questions down below and I'll be sure to get back to as many as I can. And let me know if you like these videos where I give you guys little tips. You know, these aren't the most exciting in terms of visuals, but I like sharing these bits of information that I've learned throughout the years to those of you especially that are starting off. Again, I'm Nico of CamCrunch, and I'll see you guys in the next video.